Hello, welcome back. This is Grillenheimer. I'm older, I'm over 50, and what I want to kind of mention today in a short video is gaming in the 80s. Because gaming in the 80s was different than it is today. Because in the 80s, we still had arcade places, arcade machines, certain gas stations would sometimes have a little alcove or a place where they would actually have arcade games, even if it was just one or two machines, um, for the most part. Pizza places, certain restaurants where they had a smoking section and a non-smoking section, such as it was. Um, they were everywhere. Gas stations, and sometimes we would have an actual arcade business. Where I lived, we had at least three. There was a gas station that had its main convenience store, and then a room actually to the next to the right of it, all connected. They had at least about 8 to a dozen arcade machines and a pool table or two, and I believe a pinball machine or two as well. At least two pinball machines. And I had to dare go a bike across the freeway to get to it. And they had Bubble Bobble. I remember them having Bubble Bobble. Sometimes drugstores would have some arcade machines. There was a drugstore inside a mall that had an arcade inside. That was another lure for the malls back then, was the arcade. As well as the music stores and knickknack stores and whatever. And it was the only place that I ever saw rock and rope. Okay, I think that was that Konami or was that Taito? Anyway, but rock and rope was really fun and a rare find. Uh, Bionic Commando was extremely hard and a quarter cruncher. I remember seeing that in one arcade in one of our malls way back when. That was actually neat to find. Gauntlet or Gauntlet 2 was neat. I could, because normally that was one of the first rare 4-player games. And a track screen, that was another thing. They had a track screens. So with Pac-Man, which was like one of the first things ever brought out, the maze would get burned into the screen, and they realized the hard way, oh, we can't do this because there's burn-in on these cathode tube ray sets that they were made out of, and which made the arcade machines very heavy on top of that as well. And so they made sure, after the Pac-Man craze, and let me tell you, it was a craze. I'll save that for another story. That it's like, oh, we need something on here as an attract screen to show people maybe how to play, who the characters are, etc., etc. Maybe the story. And like I said, quarter cruncher. Gauntlet was a quarter cruncher. It was very fun. Even if my mother drugged me to the mall because we needed clothes, and right next to the clothing store just on the inside of the mall of this anchor store was a Gauntlet machine, and even if I didn't have money and my hip was killing me, she'd go, I said, I'd ask her for quarters, and she said, I don't have any. I was like, that's fine. And at least it would get my mind off my pain, and then I went downhill from there. No, and sometimes, as kids, if you're old enough, you check the thing, chink, 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 and sometimes find a spare quarter somewhere or a token, be able to play a little bit. And basically, when you put in a 25 cents or a token into Gauntlet, you were timed. And the more you got hit, the more your time, and it was basically your health, was always going down. And then you had games like Ghosts and Goblins. Capcom was amazing at making very hard games. Strider was a Capcom game that I only ever saw at one location, hidden inside a shoe store near the mall, but not in the mall. I think just for feet, after your 12th, after 11, your 12th pair is free, or after 12, your next pair is free, or whatever. Wow, that was nice. And so after about, every 8 months or so, because, you were growing and your kids, you're always having to go and buy new shoes. But that was the thing, is that when you went from, whether it was the ColecoVision of 84, in the Atari systems of 81, 83, and boy, those years just seemed so long back then. Then the NES came out in 86, I think, or 85, 86. And those games were very, very close looking to the arcade counterparts. And that was the thing, is that when you had the machine, a home machine, you wanted to be able to play what you were playing in the arcades. And so the Coleco did it fairly well. The Atari 2600 was absolutely horrendous in comparison, so it still made people want to go to the arcade and play Pac-Man or Miss Pac-Man or Donkey Kong or Space Invaders, Asteroids or whatnot, because the Atari 2600 just really could not do it with its limitations. Activision was able to really take the time to conquer and make good games on the Atari 2600. I gotta wrap this up, but and that was the thing. By the time the NES came out, I'll say 86. I might have my year wrong. That may have been the year I got it, because I got it the Christmas after it officially came out the year before. My parents were like, "You want another system? You got to get rid of the ColecoVision." And I'm like, oh man, and Pingo was completely different. I had Pingo on the Atari 5200. I think I had to get rid of the 2600 to get the 5200. I had to get rid of the Atari 5200 to get the ColecoVision. I had to get rid of the ColecoVision to be able to get the Nintendo. So, once I became adult and was still collecting, I'm like, I'm keeping every daggum system I own. I'm not selling or giving up anything I have anymore, because it was such a restriction as a kid. Now, that was the thing, is quarter crunchers. Once you got to the Nintendo, which looked very good and was almost arcade quality, but not quite. It didn't quite was able to handle all the colors. It wasn't able to push the amount of sprites along a single horizontal line like most arcades could. So there was a lot of flicker depending on what you were playing. And there was a lot of drama on the old NES as well. But what I'm getting to is that I think they came to realize, if we make the arcade version of this, the kids aren't going to go to the arcade to play this same game. Wrong. Some of us still did. But it was also the waning of the arcade business model of the time. And some kids were just growing up, getting into girls and cars and jobs and everything. So, oh gosh, I'm over time. So I think that's why they said, okay, here's Rygar, but it's not the arcade version. And so when a lot of us were expecting the arcade version, we're like, well, what is this? This is an adventure game. This isn't what I wanted. But it was still a great game. Bionic Commando. We got Bionic Commando, and it, had a look of the arcade game, but it really didn't. And then it had the same music, and you're like, what is this? This isn't the arcade game. but it was more playable because it was more than just 4 or 5 levels, and then it goes over and over and over again. So they were trying to do multiple things by giving you more gameplay, because you're paying $30 to $50 a game. I remember getting Ghost and Goblins on the NES for $30. Which, yes, that Capcom game was very almost a well done, not exactly, comparison to the arcade machine. You can still see its limitations, the size of Arthur, the size of the monsters, but overall it played the same. It was just as hard and just as fun. And so when you bought a game or spent, I remember going to Goldbro and paying $30, I think, for Ghost and Goblins, or somewhere like that, or Zaire, I can't remember. It's like you wanted to buy this game. You wanted to be able to complete it. Well, it was tough. Or even Mega Man 2, or any of the Mega Man games. They were tough. Now, there was no arcade Mega Man. That just sort of came on its own. Let me unplug this real quick. And so, when you bought a game, you wanted to complete it. When you went to the arcade to play an arcade game, you played to see how far you could get. One game actually ever mentions that. Donkey Kong. How far can you get? Oh boy, that was off. So there was that, how far can you get? A high score kind of mentality. But when the NES came out, they're like, kids aren't going to want to share their high scores. Like, you can go out to a location and try to beat someone else's high score that you don't know. So let's make an adventure out of this. And I think there was a lot to be had there, as much as we didn't quite like it at the time. I didn't like some of that at the time, but at the same time, it was a good thing. I will admit that I preferred the arcade look of Super Mario Brothers. Yes, the word is brothers. It's just an abbreviation. You still say the word. Anyway, bros ain't a word, okay? Neither is ain't, but anyway. So I remember when Mario 2 came out, I was just like, what is this? This is cartoony. And I didn't know at the time that they had taken another game and put Mario characters in it because they thought we were too dumb to be able to play Lost Worlds. The original Super Mario Brothers 2, that was in Japan, that was super hard. And they did eventually bring that out on the Super Nintendo and that trilogy. And then Mario 3 came out. I remember being very like, what have they? No, not another adventure game. Can it be like an arcade game? I paid about $50 to $60 for it on my mom's credit card. She wasn't happy about that, and I can't remember. And then she took me to that movie, The Wizard, with the kid from Wonder Years in it, and she's like, "This is nothing but a commercial." She was not happy, and to say the least. And like the whole draw of this companion travel movie was him going to the contest at the very end and seeing the Mario 3 game on like this huge set of like 9 TVs together or something like that. It was huge, unless I'm remembering wrongly. But and I think they put the Power Glove in there and the NES Advantage, other little accessories and everything, it basically was a commercial. Sad to say. And it wasn't that great of a movie. It was okay. But yeah, they were just pushing Mario 3. But long story short, I think that whether it was Capcom, Taito, Sega, or Nintendo, they're like, okay, these kids, our audience might be the same. We're actually reaching a wider audience than people that are tall enough to be able to play on an arcade machine. Some of these kids are probably shorter than that, and we want to appeal to a bigger audience. And so, they're like, this is not a quarter cruncher. Let's make an adventure game out of that, because The Legend of Zelda did so well on the NES. It really did. And so once that formula was kind of magic in a bottle released, then, and I could be wrong, comment down below. Subscribe if you haven't already. I do a variety of things here. Sometimes biblical lessons, Transformers TCG, Transformer stuff, whatever, talking about old times. And I haven't done this in a while. But yeah, just, what are some of your, now that I've shared a few things about myself, and just I hate to say it, love of arcades. And that was one thing, like, Konami made sure they did, was like, well, we're going to release Gradius, we're going to release Life Force, and it's going to be arcade perfect. And they just about were on the NES. They were missing some colors, but other than, and maybe some polish, other than that, they were close to arcade perfection, but not arcade perfect, for their shooters. And there was a lot of Konami games I wish they had released on the NES, that they didn't. And so I'm glad that, so I just got a reply from somebody about a meme that I sent. But, let me know down below some of y'all's experiences of the 80s, if or even 90s, if you lived during those times. And sometimes there's still a few arcades around. You'd have to, what's that? I've only been there once, and it wasn't even with my family. I can't remember the name of the place. That has lots of arcade games, and unfortunately, the older arcade machines are hard to find. But I'll end with this. I got to get to work. I'm late. Street Fighter 2 was big, if not bigger than Pac-Man. So much that, yeah, you could find Pac-Man machines back in 1988, 81 in the front of every single store. The Nintendo Play Choice 10 machine you could find almost in front of every other Walmart and department store as well for a while. But when Street Fighter 2 came out, you could find it in every single gas station up and down the road. And you never knew who had which version, if it was a knockoff version, the official version, if it was faster than normal, or if there were certain tricks in there you couldn't do on other machines. It was wild. It was like Pac-Man all over again. And so, let me know some of your experiences and some of the fun that y'all had. Where you don't have to tell me where, or unless you want to mention your state or something. And maybe how old you were, because I would bike to this little gas station called a Zippy Mart that's no longer around, and they had Ghosts and Goblins. On occasion, they had 1942 or 43 for a while, and they'd rotate their machines, and my friend and I, we'd get a drink, like Mr. Pibb, Sprite or something like that, and a candy bar in chunk quarters, and have fun, and then ride back. So, didn't mean to go 20. I'm obviously late to work. We'll see you next time. Throw scraplets at the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. We'll see you next time. Have a great day. Have a blessed day. Thanks for watching.